Okay, it's 4 o'clock. So thanks so much, everybody, for coming to Kayla's thesis defense. She's been working so hard. I'm the chair of her committee, Laura Washburn. And also we have Lori Martin, who most of you know, who's on the committee, and Morgan McCune. Okay, so sorry, I had a cough. And I'm just going to introduce Kayla, and then she's going to read for a little bit, and then we'll have a traditional question and answer period. In the question and answer period, first she will have questions from Lori and Morgan, and then myself. And then if we have any follow-ups, we'll do that. Then Chase and Chris will have a chance to ask questions, and then it'll be open to anyone. But she'll be reading with some explanation of the poems. It should be pretty pleasurable and enjoyable time for all of us but Kayla, even for Kayla. And so I'll introduce her by saying just a few things. Kayla is from originally from Liberal, Missouri, where she grew up out in the country on a farm. And at Pitt State, she is completing her master's requirements, and this is the 3rd year that she's been editor-in-chief of the Cow Creek Review. And a lot of people also know her as a plant mom with her 50 or 60 plants. And my experience of working with her on the thesis has been a very pleasurable one, even as we went into this mode of being suddenly distanced from each other. We were able to do Zoom and shared documents, and I think it's been a good experience, and I've really enjoyed the poems, and I think you will too. So I will mute everyone, and then I'll have to unmute Kayla. So let's try it.
I think everyone already.
Oops. Okay, it's just that when I did that, it moved Kayla's name from the top of the list, and now I have to unmute her. Sorry. That's just taking me longer than it should have.
Are we good? Okay. All right. So I thought I would read primarily things that are not super depressing or heavy just because of the time, and also sometimes they're hard to read aloud. But a lot of those poems are about anxiety and depression and death and loneliness and really sad things like that. And so I wanted to limit that at least a little bit. So I thought that I would try to keep it at least a little bit lighter. Anyways, in the first section of my manuscript, it's called Lushaby. And it's kind of like an introduction to me, but also because most of these poems are personal, there's definitely some persona poems, but in my first section, it's an introduction to me, but also kind of an introduction to my anxiety, because that's a thing that I talk about a lot in the poem. And there are lots of aspects to that anxiety. And then this first section, it's kind of centered on sleep. It's something that I've kind of always had this weird relationship with. I was a colic baby, so I was up all the time. And as a kid, I remember waking up a lot and just screaming and crying because I didn't want to sleep, or I was scared or something. And even now, it just takes a minute. So that's what's going on in this first section. This first one that I'm going to read is technically an acrostic poem, but I thought it would kind of set the mood. It's called Van Gogh's Wheat Field with Crows. The wheat field glows in the last breath of sun, a sea of brushstrokes. A trail of flattened grass bleeds a green river through it. Some night has latched on to the poor wheat stems, skinny foreshadows of the coming darkness. The moon pales into the black streaked sky. Mad feather smudges streak blue, where the crows crawl out like bits of sleepwalking night. Continuing with this idea of like sleep or sleeplessness, I guess, is kind of like a background poem. It's called Fear of Night, and there's one thing mentioned in it that is explained in a previous poem, and that is like the dead third grade friend. In the previous poem, it kind of explains when I was in third grade, one of my best friends was killed in a car accident. So that's something that has always kind of like been a source of anxiety for me. And it like pops up a lot, even now after 16 years. But this poem is called Fear of Night. Mom tucked me under my Mickey Mouse comforter, but when she left, I'd lie awake clutching its primary colors to my chin as the profound darkness sunk into me like an aching bone bruise, deep and mysterious. I'd fake timid sobs until they grew real, hot and piercing, like a siren luring my mother back to me. Comfort came slowly with the sound of her tired feet brushing the carpet in my room. I'd tell her, bad dream, dead third grade friend, ghosts from the backyard cemetery. I couldn't breathe alone, so I'd fight her with exaggerated breaths to make her stay, settle her hand on my warm back, and soothe until I slept. Along with like sleeplessness, another anxiety that kind of appears a little bit throughout this section is like, or I guess throughout the whole manuscript, is also loneliness. I mentioned that earlier. And it's not always the like romantic loneliness, but just kind of like this detached feeling. And so this next poem, it kind of runs as both. It definitely sounds more like a romantic loneliness, but I think it's applicable to both. It's called The Promise. At night, in my dark sleeplessness, I tell promises to the stars, to the gods, to the monsters in my closet and under my bed, to the cicadas who know what it means to be always looking for love. I make promises I want to keep, but really, they're just full-hearted half-barters, like a kid who begs to his mother for a puppy or pleads before supper for 2 scoops of ice cream, even small ones. I tell cicada star monster gods, I will be nice to myself. I will love myself if you just give me someone to love me too. These lies I cannot keep, but I don't have the time to make this kind of promise, the courage to wait. I do not have the power to shake hands with an angel or a voodoo man. I write the promise in sand, in thought clouds looming over the bed, in the not-so-secretly hidden journal in the bedside table. I tell myself, the cicada star monster god, the weak angel, the wayfaring lover. I tell only those who won't hear. So that poem I thought would be kind of like a mild introduction into something that I do in a lot of my sleep-related poems, and that is like make up words or cram them all together. I think I do that primarily because sometimes you just like try every word ever and it just doesn't feel like the right one. And so my solution to that is to like make up one that feels right to me and that I think other people will still be able to understand. So this next poem is called Sleep Thoughts, and that's essentially exactly what this poem is. Sleep Thoughts. Appaloosa dapple-backed clouds string across the sky. I have not dropped a penny of sleep into the grain bin bank. When I close my eyes, I don't find sleep, but I find a lot of words all jumbled together like rhinos at a beach party. Lushaby baby, rhino baby, beach baby. Oxpeckers flit from rump to horn to tail to back and sing about black corded mambas that slink into dreams, a lush lullaby. Mamba snakes prowl thin-skinned Zeuses with electrocution on their tongues, heaviness, eyes and silverbacks, Ruth mouth dripping, diamond teeth. Ivory-billed butterflies knock out rosebush breath and leaves that tickle. And if I smile and wave and smile and wave and still drown in other words and thoughts, at least I will smell like summer's laugh and be softer than winter's last spell-broken brittle finger. Lushaby, cloud, sleep, dream, little Kayla. So that's the end of my selection of my poems from my first section. So I'm going to read some from the next section, which is centered mainly on family. I tend to write a lot about my parents and my grandparents. My grandma died a few years back, and even before that, like, she was a pretty significant person in my life, as I feel many grandmas are. And she had like a pretty big influence in my life and my personality. And so she finds her way into my poems a lot of the times. This section I feel like ended up being about love and like how to love, and like kind of like love's place in a family, especially with a person who does feel detached sometimes. So that's kind of like what these poems explore. I thought I would start with one that's like pretty lighthearted. It's just reminisceful. When I was younger, for a lot of the time, I would go on like these semi rides with my dad. He woke up super early, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and for some reason I wanted to go with him, even though I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I would willingly do that. So that was kind of like our thing. Eventually I grew out of it a little bit, but it's still nice to like look back on. So that's what this poem is. Semi-lullaby. Dad's semi idles in the driveway, a lullaby rumbling. At 2 a.m., Dad calls through my bedroom door. Sweetheart, you coming with? Wake up. I sleep shrug off my tie-dye comforter, dress in whatever a 7-year-old wears, and grab a banana from the kitchen. Outside, the air is steady, quiet, and peaceful. Cats glide between my legs, soundless angel shadows. All the world is asleep except us and the cats. I lug myself up the high steps. Don't touch the exhaust pipe, it's hot. Tug at the dangling seatbelt straps or the sturdy mechanical braces under the seat. Dad might hoist me up by the calves like a cheerleader. I crawl over the driver's seat, past the long gear shift and over Dad's huge coffee thermos. The seat is nylon, patchy from years of wear, and the seatbelt head is heavy steel that my young and tired fingers always need help unbuckling. Dad settles in his seat, presses buttons that release air from the brakes, whoosh, and flips switches that light up the trailer like a beautiful, quiet Christmas. Tick, tick, tick. Our driveway wakes up with sleep buzz still in its eyes, yawns a tunnel passage as we go. The truck heaves forth with a shudder and a grumble, grunts with each shift down the empty highway, the regular tiger purr of the engine and the occasional blurt of static on the CV sing me to tranquility. This next poem is about my grandma. That's really all I need to know, so I'm just going to get into it. Learning to make pancakes at grandma's house. I tap the eggshell on the counter, peel apart and plop it on the Flower Mountain peak. Plastic orange whisk, thwip, 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 thick, creamy batter. Grandma watches as I pour batter sizzling on the hot skillet. One big circle and two smaller ones on top make Mickey Mouse. I was 9, she an ageless 70-something, all cane sugar hair and packed cocoa eyes. Her patience was impossible, forever giving in to my relentless need for honeycombs in front of the TV, bedtime back scratches. When I'd stay the night, I'd wake in tranquil mornings, dim light peeking around thick curtains. The kitchen glowed with gold dust motes, and pink with strawberry decor lining the walls. Down the hall, Grandma slept soundly through the clink of plates and measuring spoons, the thwip, thwip, thwip of mixing batter, and pancakes growing gold under hot sizzle. I made her a tray, 2 pancakes smeared with peanut butter, a banana, a purple iris from her garden. She taught me how to love in this quiet way. Get a quick drink. So the next poem is the final one from the third section the second section, sorry, that I'm going to read. And it's a mother poem, so happy Mother's Day. So here we go. My mother's lap. I wedge between my mother's hip and the chair's armrest, shoulder smashed to shoulder. She sighs and scoots, or smiles and throws the blanket back. I sag against her. When I'm blah, I sprawl across her lap for endless back scratches, scratches I craved as a child, scratches I cried for, crawled into her lap for. At 62, her lap has softened around tired bones. When her legs grow tingling numb, she pushes me off. At 15, I thought I outgrew my mother's lap. I'd sprouted inches, and sports hefted me up to 140 pounds. At 24, I miss her. Every couple weeks, I drive 20 miles of bean fields and ratty country highways to see her. I know she is tired of work and money. I know I'm not a child. Sometimes I just want comfort or to comfort, and we've never been good at saying I love you. So section 3, there's only 3 sections, so this is the last one. It's called, oh my gosh, I totally just forgot what it's called. Not important right now. Anyways, but what I wanted to do in this third section is kind of get at that constant like tugging of anxiety, because it's really hard to get away from sometimes. So there are some like really terrible days, and then like the next day might be fine, but it's just kind of like always in the back of your mind, and it's always just like creeping on you. So that's kind of what I wanted to get at with this section. Okay, so I'm just going to read the next like 3 poems back to back so that maybe you guys can feel a little bit of that arc of like having a source of anxiety and like not really knowing what to do with it, and then finding some sort of release from it. So the first one is, the TV has always been kind. I wrestle myself shoulder to toe in blankets in the static of midnight. In front of me, glowing blue, yellow, red, pink, like a mix of night and sun, the television takes me to the cartoons of my youth. Arthur with his thick-rimmed glasses skipping down the street, Clifford, big and red as Emily's love. They might get lost or lose a toy or a soccer game, skin a knee. Their friends might forget their birthdays or find new friends to swim with for the summer. But every time, it ends with full color, smiles, everything painted perfectly inside thick, safe lines. These cartoon kids are the same they were the same today they were 18 years ago. But I've grown tall and dull. For the comfort, I black out the world around me. Sit so close, the darkness doesn't lurk. I might pour a bowl of crunch berries and swirl the colors in milk until the only color left is cloudy. That's reality. The children have lost themselves. Their friends have died from cancer and car crashes. They are running down the street, ducking into alleys and broken windows to avoid being shot. They are being shot in their classrooms, in malls where they enjoy frozen custard with sprinkles. The sprinkles have melted, the colors have dulled and blurred. The thick black line grows thinner, thinner, thinner. And I am trying to escape this. The dead best friends, lost grandmothers, sick children, gunmen ambushing crowds. Lament. I sing darkness to Mother Mary. Why, why? She does not come. She stands powerless on the dresser, moonlight shining white porcelain, one hand adorning cotton-boned collar, the other cupping tomorrow's dove. I don't pray for angel wings to lift the world from my shoulders. I lie in wrinkled bed sheets, lie over my head and cry. I cry to arrive loneless. I swim in myself, soundless drops of hopelessness, secret wisdom, an answer dry and pulsing. Yesterday in therapy. Part 1. Yesterday, the cool, wet kiss of the cool, wet rain was a surprising comfort. The months had been filled with too much sun. Sitting in front of my therapist, I said, I feel great. I smiled like I meant it. I think I meant it. She said, you should be proud. Look at all you've accomplished. Such unbelievably positive feedback. I cried. The therapist asked, what are you feeling? Isn't that always the therapist's question? What was I feeling? Something like happiness? Something like relief? I didn't know that foreign choking, but the tears I knew. A similar hot to all the other times I cried because I felt ugly or worthless or lost. No, something like happiness, something. Part 2. Today, I try to soak out the heavy dread, but I don't care that the tub is cold and the bubbles have flattened. The wine I sip is too dry and stale, heavy on my tongue, bitter. I don't care that my muscles protest the cold water. They clench and tremble, skin paling. I am too heavy to move. The candle is falling dim. The dark is creeping in. I can't feel my heart. It is not my heart. Yesterday's heart was squeezed by a miracle of self-love. I want that heart, that healthy, beating heart. But now I don't care that I haven't reached for the shampoo. 10 cold minutes, and I can't even think of the razor. Not that I would. I wish I could. I wish I could do something but sit heavy in the pitiless water. I wish I could vomit this sick stomach. I wish this wine was turpentine. I could see something then, see something come from me, some action. Not these damn words, this suffocating silence. I wish that blood and that laugh was my laugh. I wish that heart in yesterday was sometimes my heart. This next one's called Sometimes I Forget I'm Woman. When I'm walking alone by the lakeside with a duck's raspy chatter gliding over the sun-rippled water, when the heat reaches through me to steal my breath and demand salutation, when the only sound is gravel and leaves colliding tiny thunder under my feet on Miner's Trail, when the oak shivers delightfully with squirrel races, stretches trapeze limbs a l'enconce of the Spanish dancer, I forget I am woman. Instead, I am the sexless birch with limbs splayed, belly up to catch every raindrop. The loon sitting Buddha-like among the ocean flux, swaying with a gentle push of the saltwater atmosphere. The fly on the fingernail of a mighty hand-sprung mantle fresh, there kissing salt grains with my sooty antennae. and the solitary badger, underground listening, memorizing footsteps and hoof steps, dagger claws withdrawn, wigwam wallowed. I am the California king snake, twisted and mesmerizing Cheshire ringlets, belly round and taut with breakfast, and the osprey, wild wings fanning, my sharp eyes pulling in the light life of a boundless world. Okay, I have one more poem. And I think that this is also the poem that my whole entire manuscript ends with. And as you maybe sensed from talk beforehand and just from knowing me and maybe from these poems if you didn't know me, I find a lot of comfort in nature. And so I always like look to that whenever I'm writing, or if I'm like feeling any kind of way and I kind of want to either escape it or look closer at that. That's nature is always where I end up going. It's kind of my sanctuary, I guess. So I guess it makes sense then that when I'm having moments, I can imagine nature inside of me, and in this case, it's a woodpecker. So I don't know, in general, this last poem is just a pretty good summary of what it's like to be in my head. So here you go. My red-bellied woodpecker. She lives in my dorsal cavity, flitting between vertebrae and brain. In humid air, her strong wings beat past blood and bone and thoughts. She packs my brain wrinkles with small treasures, glossy photos, and her favorite colors, emerald and honey yellow. Sometimes she perches on the spongy walls and sings a small guttural song, quirr, quirr, chirr, her favorite, but when she's lonely, a throaty crying cough, cha, cha, cha. She feeds on termite words, sad berries, and hard nutshells, jams them into any crook, and crack, crack, cracks them back into manageable pieces. And that's all I have for you guys. So yay. I can see you clapping, but I don't hear it. Oh, I hear some claps. Well, thank you anyways.
There we go. Hi, Kayla.
Hi.
I'll start with a question for you. I had a different one, but this subject sort of came up and naturally in conversation with, Facebook conversation with Laura, but it was also right on the heels of me having taught Ted Kuzer, in which he sort of says all sorts of terrible things about writing in present tense. I think you do it really well, but there are lots of poets and other writers who weigh in on one side or the other of it. So I was noticing it's interesting to me that some of your poems that are clearly in the past, like Semi-Lullaby, that's present tense, but then you have, for example, Too Close to Home, which is in past tense. And I'm wondering if that's something you think about, and sort of why you use present tense when you use it, and if you agree with Kuzer.
I don't know. I don't think I'm familiar enough with his argument to say. I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I think that I kind of just let it come out however it comes out. And I might argue that when I write something in present tense that was in fact past tense, it's probably going to be that I am actively reliving that as I'm writing it, and so it feels like it's happening again, or I can at least feel things so vividly that it should feel like it's in past or present tense. Whereas I didn't read this one, but Too Close to Home is a little bit of a tougher subject for me. And so I think keeping it in the past makes it feel a little safer.
That makes sense.
So.
Do you find yourself sort of naturally going toward present tense when you write poetry?
I honestly haven't thought about it much, but now that I'm thinking about it in this moment, I do write a lot in present tense. I think that part of that happens in the revision process whenever I'm like trying to cut back on little words, because instead of saying like I was feeling this way, I can just say like I feel, and it's like less wordy and it just feels smoother. So I think that's probably part of it.
Okay.
It must be my turn because I just got unmuted. Is that correct? I think there were several examples in the reading that you gave today, but also in your entire manuscripts. There are many examples of repetition of sounds, repetition of words, repetition of phrases, and parallel construction. And I wonder if you would talk about the use of repetition in poetry in general, and how you use repetition in your poems.
So repetition regarding sound in general with poetry, it's all about the way that we hear it and the way that we feel it when we hear it. So even if a poem doesn't speak to you on a mental level, I guess you could say, like if you don't completely understand what it means, then there should be some kind of like sound that you can feel in that poem, and that can be done through like assonance or consonants or just like those repeated sounds. And so that's part of the reason why I do that in my poetry. Also, I have always loved music, and so being able to find the music in like spoken word is something that I try to do. I think that you can sense a lot through sound over meaning sometimes. Like somebody can say they mean like good job, but they might be sarcastic. It depends on the tone. So I try to create sounds that fit my poem tonally. And as for like repeated words, I think that that's just maybe a hint of OCD, I'm not sure. But primarily it's like the recurrence of those words in my head, because they're speak to me more than other words, and so I think it's more of a personal thing. Like throughout my manuscript, I know I use the word heavy a lot. I think I even said that like when I was introducing something earlier. But sometimes if I can't exactly explain in words what I mean, I can go back to that word and like all of its connotations, and then all of the connotations that were in previous poems that also contain that word to kind of like speak a little bit. So yeah, and it just sounds nice sometimes.
Okay.
So this is when I should ask a question about negative capability or some crazy thing from theory just to freak out future students.
Freak me out.
But instead, I think for many people, the process of thesis is a more intense process of revision than they might have ever done before. What do you think you'll take with you from this process? And could you just talk a little bit about revision in general and your thesis and poetry?
Revision in general, I dislike so much. I get really attached to things, or I get the opposite of that and I like hate everything. And so it's really difficult for me to like revisit something that I wrote and still love it or hate it, either way. So revising though has taught me how to like clean things up. I tend to be pretty wordy sometimes, and so one thing that I think I definitely got a lot better at, but that I could still work on, is that wordiness, and just kind of like cutting back on all those like little words that kind of distract from the true meaning. But more personally, I think that revisions have like taught me about honesty, because I feel like whenever I have a first draft of a poem, I might end up saying something I didn't know I was going to say, but I'm like kind of scared to visit it completely. And so in the revision, I'm forced to have to like take a look at what I was saying and what my subconscious was saying, or at least trying to get me to put out there. And so it's taught me a lot about honesty in that sense, and to just, you know, revise even if you hate it or even if you love it. Sometimes you got to kill your darlings, all the creative writers say, and that's really hard sometimes too, but that's when you write another poem with your darling as center star. Oh, you're on mute.
Which of your made up playful words or mashed together words is your favorite?
Well, when I was reading my third section, I was like, oh, I can't remember the name. And then I read lament, which actually contains the word from the section, and that's loneless. I think that one is like kind of fun to me because it can mean so many different things. It sounds like lonely, but it also sounds like you're without the loneliness because it has the less. And so it's just like one of those words that felt right, even though it's not a real word. So I think maybe that one.
The end of that poem comes to the idea of arriving at arrive loneless, you say.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means in that context of that poem?
So I think in that poem, it's really about just like feeling so lonely in yourself that you kind of just like become aware of it, I guess, and that you kind of like embrace it in whichever way that it comes. I don't really know. I haven't honestly thought about it too much, but again, with like the possible double meaning there, it's kind of like you're arriving maybe lonely, but perhaps without the loneliness at the same time.
Thanks, Kayla. The committee has all had a chance to ask one question. Do any committee members want to ask another one before I move on to other? You could like, okay, Morgan.
Oh no.
I could just ask real quick, because I know it's very challenging, and it seems to me to be challenging each time you attempt it. But can you talk a little bit about your process of choosing poems and how you arrange them? Can you just kind of go through the process and how it seems after the process to you to be constructed as a work?
You mean like organizing the manuscript?
Yes.
Okay. So that was actually a bigger nightmare than the revisions themselves because my poems don't really, I wasn't thinking about like a narrative structure. Like when you write a poem, you write a poem and then you write another poem, and they're not always directly related. They might speak to each other. They might be about the same thing. And so, but like saying different words. So choosing words that were, or choosing poems, I guess, to go in the manuscript was like something kind of challenging in itself because I write about the same subject matter a lot, but I have like slightly different perspective or something new to say about it. And so first choosing which poems got to stay was really hard. But in the end, I just wound up doing like a little compare and contrast with them and deciding which ones maybe like spoke more strongly. And then as for the revision, I don't know how many revisions we went through for like organization for the whole thing, but probably like 5. It was a lot. But in the end, it ended up kind of being like a little bit of a character arc. So it's like an introduction to Kayla as this person who has anxiety, but who also has a life. And then it gives a little bit of like backstory and whatnot with the family section. And then in the end, I wanted poems that kind of like, themselves worked through anxiety. So I think that's kind of like how I ended up, or we ended up organizing everything. So first with like some snapshots of me, and then like, this is where I came from. This is how I'm kind of dealing now with this current family situation. And this is like my constant struggle. That was like the third section. So
Thanks,
I hope
Kayla.
that answers your question.
Thank you.
I think that organization is challenging for some poets who don't try to write everything with a story. But I was just thinking as you were answering that maybe what you really didn't read as much of today were the poems that have to do with nature. Was there a poem that you considered reading today and that along that lines that you didn't read?
I don't know. I have a lot. I got like my favorite one in there, which is the Red-Bellied Woodpecker one. I think that Dog Day Cicada was one that I kind of wanted to read. I've always kind of been attached to it. And it was in the back of my mind when I was reading The Promise, because I talk about cicadas. And I was like, oh man, I wish I would have read that. But I don't think I would have had time.
Lori, did you have another question?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. So the one I was going to ask, I'm not going to. So if you could choose any poem from your collection that you feel like sort of just best captures the spirit of it, what one would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. The spirit of the whole manuscript?
Yeah.
Whoa. I don't know.
Two.
I keep thinking about this Red-Bellied Woodpecker poem, and it just like it has a little bit of nature in it, and it has like some bits of anxiety, you know, like the birds like eating sad berries and termite words. And so it kind of like echoing that anxiety, but it's also kind of like a healing piece because it talks about, you know, like cracking everything back into manageable pieces. And so I feel like that hopefully encompasses the whole thing. I want people to feel like either they have or I have some kind of healing after everything. So maybe that one. I like Sleep Thoughts because of the strangeness. It started just as like a stream of consciousness thing, and then I had to kind of make some sort of sense, and I thought that it maybe speaks well to like the sleeplessness portion of everything, but I don't know. The woodpecker one maybe.
I love that one. That's a good one. I also wanted to say, I love the cicada star monster gods. I actually wrote that down. I'd forgotten. That's just such a great sound. So
Thank you.
was the end. That was the only question I had.
Cool.
Well, first, whoever has seen a red-bellied woodpecker today, raise your hand.
I have one that's obsessed with my bird feeder, and it's so funny watching him eat from it because it's like this big and he's like this big, and so he like is dangling off of it. It's so hilarious to watch.
Awesome. 3 people, though. I'm pretty impressed by that. Okay, that was not really my question. But Kayla, I want to say I really enjoyed your reading, and I've enjoyed reading through your thesis over the last few days. I think you've done good work, and it's been really nice to see how your work has evolved and just improved a lot over the last few years. But after that niceness, I'll try to ask you a tough question or two.
Oh, wait.
Maybe not. But I want to talk about loneliness. And you mentioned it at one point as you were introducing your reading or introducing some of the poems. You mentioned romantic loneliness, and then I think you suggested that your version of loneliness in your poems is maybe different from romantic loneliness. So this will be maybe a 2 or 3 part question, but that's the first part. How would you explain romantic loneliness? And then how is the loneliness in your poetry different from that or similar to that or whatever the case may be?
So the loneliness that I feel is like more anxiety based is, I think maybe a better word is even like detached. Like sometimes you're in a room, but you're not in a room. You're with your family, but you're not with your family. And so I think that my version of loneliness most of the time is like that inability to like make connections even whenever you like desperately want to. And then there's a little bit of romantic loneliness, but the detached thing from like everybody else definitely has more of an effect on my life. So that tends to be like what I write about more.
And what do you mean by romantic loneliness? I think I maybe know what that means, but what's your take on that?
I guess it's just like the desire to love and be loved. Like sometimes you just want to be able to do that, and it's just like not available to you in a certain time for whatever reason. But that's what I mean. Just like, you want to love somebody romantically, you want to be loved back.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I also want to ask a related question. How does the concept of loneliness function in your poem? So there's the emotion of loneliness that we might feel, or we might write about in a diary. I felt lonely today. But how does loneliness function kind of as a poetic device in your work? And I'm actually, maybe as a way to think about this, I'm thinking back to something you said or wrote when you took the graduate poetry workshop with me, I guess a year ago.
Okay.
And you made a really interesting point about Dorianne Lau's poetry, that she sometimes takes a personal experience and within the poem turns it into something symbolic. So the personal becomes a kind of broader motif in her poem. So I'm wondering if loneliness functions in that way in your poems at all, or just in general, kind of how does loneliness work as a poetic?
I think for me personally, just like writing the poetry in which I kind of explore where that loneliness is coming from, it's kind of a healing thing for me. So I can recognize like what I'm feeling, which is lonely, and then why I'm feeling that, and like kind of get some sort of healing from that. But I guess I try not to be so personal that it can't be reached by other people. So I would like to think that it does kind of serve the same purpose as like maybe being like a window for other people who are feeling the same thing or kind of just want to understand loneliness.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Kayla.
Hi.
Okay, I've got an easy one for you.
Oh, good.
So, and you touched on nature a little bit, but I've noticed in these poems and then other poems of yours that I've read that there's oftentimes the presence of animals. And in particular, I noticed there's lots of birds showing up and not necessarily in a flattering way. They're not necessarily romanticized birds. So what's up with that?
So like I said earlier, nature is just kind of like this comforting thing for me. And at the same time, I'm not here to romanticize it. I'm here to tell you what it is. So I guess that's probably why some of these birds and other animals don't get the rose-colored glasses. But in general, it's kind of like it's like mainly just a comfort for me. Like that's just where I feel at home and where I feel at peace. And for some reason, birds have always spoken to me. Not literally unless it's a parrot, but they always just like seem to symbolize something. So I use them as symbols sometimes, and sometimes I use them for just like beauty purposes, because I think they're beautiful. And same with other animals. And then I also look to nature to kind of like explore aspects of like humanness, which is maybe weird and contradictory, but I think it's really interesting to like look at animal behavior and then compare it to like human behavior and see what you can learn about yourself or about humans in general.
Okay, thank you. That was a great answer.
Cool.
There we go.
I think you're muted, Laura.
Oh.
Okay, so I unmuted everyone but me, although you can unmute yourselves if you want. What I want to do now is, before we take any questions from anybody who has any, I want to give Kayla a chance to make thank yous for anybody you wanted to thank in your process and your committees or mentors or family. And then I thought anybody who wanted to ask you questions could.
Cool. So thanks first to everybody for showing up. This is nice. Lots of familiarness. But, you know, obviously special thanks, special thanks to my thesis committee, Lori, Laura, and Morgan. You all have been like super helpful and just like little muses, but the kind that makes me get shit done and not just like, oh, like this is a thing I could do. You're like, no, do it. So thanks for that. I honestly feel like in the last year working on this with you guys that I have grown a lot more as a writer, and I owe all of that to you guys. And then while I'm on the subject of writing, thanks to Chase and Chris for also kind of like being there whenever I needed help revising or I needed advice. And then thanks to all of my workshop people for also being that kind of person that's like, hey, this is good. This, not so much. Clear it up. So thanks for that. And then thanks to all of my besties, who there are several of them here, so thank you for being here. And my mom, who doesn't know that I write about her, but just found out today.
Oh.
Just kidding, she knows. I've asked her questions. I was like, hey, I'm writing this poem. How old are you?
Thanks. Does anybody else have questions for Kayla about her poetry or about her process?
I was going to ask you the question Chris asked about the distinction between romantic loneliness and detached loneliness, but he asked that, so I don't have that to ask anymore. But I just want to say congratulations on a really great performance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't have any questions. I just have a few comments. First of all, congrats. You did fantastic. So I think that the poem that really stood out the most as far as the tone and the shift in the tone was Yesterday in Therapy. I really enjoyed how in part one you did something with light and dark here, and I think in part one it's supposed to be this portrayal of light, right? But really it's very shadowed because maybe the emotions aren't as honest. Maybe there's a certain like performance that's happening in therapy, and I think that line is reiterated by the line, I think I meant it. And then in part two, I think although it is the more shadowed emotion, it's more honest. So it's the light is being shown on how, you know, how dark and how cold this is. And it's just by, you know, the bubbles are cold and you know, you wish you had the heart that you had yesterday. So I like how, like, I like that juxtaposition between the first part could be considered the light, but it really is shadowed. And then the second part could be considered the darkness, but it really is the light being shown on it. So that was brilliant. And there are many other poems that I really enjoyed. The one that I didn't get to write down the name was actually the one that I think I enjoyed the most. And it was about watching your grandmother cook. And I just really, I mean, I loved all of it. I loved the colors in that. I think that the cane sugar hair and the cocoa powder eyes was fantastic. But what really, I think, sent it home was she taught me how to love in this quiet way. And that was really impactful. So great job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I also don't have a question, but I did want to say that I think I've like said this sort of before in passing, but I really was of the school of you have to have lived to have written or to write. And I wouldn't have believed anyone trying to tell me that that was not true, but meeting you changed my mind. And your poetry is beautiful and touching and deep, and it's not easy to get me to change my mind. So I guess congrats. I don't know. It was really great. All of them are so great.
That's so nice. Thank you.
I just want to say congratulations because I've seen you in the office with like all your papers everywhere at like 8 in the morning, and then I come back at 5 in the afternoon, you're still there, and you're done now. So I'm so excited for you, and I'll bring you wine sometime so you can celebrate properly.
Yeah. Approved.
Can I ask one more question? And that, you know, you may have an answer for, or you may not. Either way is okay. But you talked about the fact that you see yourself as having grown as a poet over the last year while writing the thesis. And I'm just curious, could you speculate on how you think your poetry will continue to change and evolve in the next year or two? Or are there ways in which you would like it to continue to evolve in the future?
Right. So this last year, I've really opened myself up to like experimenting. I feel like before I was like, yeah, I'm writing like lyrical poetry, and it's like introspective, and I can just like take this moment and live in this moment and make it, you know, more than it is and make it last longer and just be beautiful. And I feel like I was pretty obsessed with that for a while, just like making everything beautiful in some way. And over this last year, I've become a lot more honest with myself, and I think with everything. And so I'm not so attached to having this romanticized look. Like if I was to write a poem about a red-bellied woodpecker, I don't know, last year, 2 years ago, it would just be her like on a tree, and I would probably talk about her colors and things like that. And now I'm just like, yep, she's the thing inside of me that's, you know, keeping me together, which isn't necessary. Like it might be beautiful in its own way, but it's kind of like dealing with more difficult subject matter at the same time. And so I think that, at least I hope, that I have been able to capture more like complexity too. So just being more honest, being more complex, and then like taking the leap and experimenting with weird words or with spacing or whatever. I think all of that has kind of like surfaced through this process, and I hope that it keeps doing that.
Thanks. Good stuff.
So I would like in a minute for the committee and the creative writing faculty and Kayla to stay. But before we say goodbye to everyone else, again, great job, Kayla. Thank everybody so much for showing up. And if anybody does want to say anything before you go, go for it. We're not in a hurry. But then as people do start to leave, I did want the creative writing faculty and the committee and Kayla to stay. But anyway, back open to everybody again, if anybody wants to say anything.
No pressure. I think I've been flattered enough.
I just want to congratulate her again. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Oh, you're muted. What happened?
Mac, I'm very proud of you. You did
Still
great.
muted.
I know. Hi, Mac.
It's a kitty cat.
And my dog was here through the whole performance too, sitting on my lap. He enjoyed it as well. And didn't bark. That's how I know he enjoyed it. He didn't bark.
Yay.
Herbie hasn't barked yet.
Yeah, Max slept through the whole thing, so you know he's peaceful when that happens.
Wow. It's probably just the comfort of my voice in general.
Yeah.
I'm going to get off now, so you guys have a good evening.
Bye. Thanks for
All right,
coming.
nice to see you.
All right.
See you.
Nice to see all of you.
Michelle's like clapping hands.
I like that.
Oh, that's nice.
Snazzy.
Is this person really here?
Hmm.
Yay, Kayla!
Yay.
No.
Good job.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kayla. We still have to figure out the printing and signature part and the binding part. So let's not forget that for some of us, that's a job that has to be done before the end of the semester. And then the reason I asked everybody to stay was because we needed to talk about the assessment piece in a minute. So that's why you're here. But I would like to hopefully sometime have Kayla back for a celebratory reading since we didn't get to do the real live audience thing. I had said maybe next semester, although now God knows when. When it's safe. So Kayla, do you have anything you wanted to say or questions? I'm sorry we're not going out for reception.
Oh, that's okay. If I had a Venmo, you could all send me money, but I'm not going to do that. Just kidding.